What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Weekend Roundup here on Touchline Talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content going up on the channel. Plenty to get to, both Euros and Copa America. Can only begin with England's great escape against Slovakia, though. I'm trying to cover a lot of ground here, so I'm going to move pretty fast through all of this. Two things I want to hit home regarding this game in England moving forward. First, this is not a sport that lends itself to what we kind of think of as clutch players, right? You don't have those decisive moments at the end of games consistently like in basketball or in football. The ability of a quarterback to lead a team down the field, a basketball player to make the big shot time and time again, where you know the ball is going to the best player, they're going to decide the game. You can kind of go down the list of sports. It is much harder to get a clutch player in soccer than some of the other sports out there. Baseball, you come up every 9 batters, so you get a decent amount of opportunities to be the decisive player, to have that decisive moment. Soccer doesn't necessarily work that way. Jude Bellingham and another player I'm going to get to in a minute have become probably, I would argue, the two clutchest players in this sport. Maybe that's going a little bit too extreme on Bellingham because this is a new thing this season. But that was his 6th stoppage time goal since joining Real Madrid for club and country. He did it against Barcelona, and then against Barcelona again. He's done it in the Champions League. And now he just rescued England from a horrendous performance and kept them alive in the Euros. He doesn't just score goals, because obviously he scored a boatload this season, but he also scores some incredibly important ones relative to the number he scores. You go look at the goals Bellingham scores, a lot of them are really important. The second guy on this list is Rodri, who scored Spain's equalizer. Eventually they take care of business, get some goals in the second half to run away from Georgia, but also conceded the first goal and had some scary moments there. Rodri is the epitome of this. He is the clutchest player in this sport, and you cannot convince me otherwise right now. Champions League final goal. Goals on decisive days, that those final games of the Premier League season. And yeah, this one to the list too. Now, it ended up not being that important, but who knows what happens if he doesn't score that goal and get Spain equalized, so that you don't have 80 minutes, 75 minutes of stress where you're trying to find the equalizer, trying to avoid going to extra time. He restored order. They got the job done from there. This is not, obviously, the most important goal he's ever scored. Bellingham, this is clearly the most important goal, and quite possibly the best goal of his career, too. That was absolutely remarkable. Then Harry Kane shows up. They find a way to survive. On that point, I've been going back and forth with a friend about this. I stand firm in my belief. Part of the conversation about this team and the Gareth Southgate aspect of it is that this team is built to be successful in knockout tournaments because of their conservative approach. It makes it much harder for you to lose. And particularly lose games you're not supposed to. Right? That is what has changed under Southgate. This would have been the first example where they got knocked out by a team they had no business getting knocked out by. They show up, they get to the later rounds, and they can't get over those final hurdles. That's what Gareth Southgate has turned them into. You're going to have games like this sometimes. It happens. They've been terrible all tournament. Nothing's going to change. At least I have no reason to believe anything's going to change. And I don't believe you can win 4 consecutive knockout games playing this way. You can win 2, you can win 3. You can get to the semis, you can get to a final like England have done. And what has happened every single time? They have ultimately come up short. The difference between England and France, who has also had a lot of success while not necessarily looking like they're maximizing all of those incredible players they have, is that when France needs to, France will go score 3 or 4 goals in a game. You go look at the World Cup finals are perfect examples of that. When the situation arises, they deliver an attack. They just don't have to win that way because you can't only win that way. You have to have the balance, and that's the one thing that Southgate has not found. And they certainly don't have it in this tournament. Can they survive a little while longer doing this? Yeah. Because they have the Bundesliga player of the season, and La Liga player of the season, and Premier League player of the season. Because they have guys like Jude Bellingham who can bail you out. Sometimes it's just about best having the most talented player on the field. That won England this game. That's why they're the betting favorites, because they have more of those guys than any other team, probably. Still don't believe you can win a tournament that way, though. You can get to a semi, you can get to a final. If they want to actually win something, this has got to change. And it's only going to take one game, potentially. If they have one really good performance where they put together 2 or 3 goals at the right time, that might be all they need, where they can, 1-0 and survive at the death and do all of these things they've been doing to get themselves to the final and then actually win it. But doing this in the quarters and then the semis and then the final, I don't see how they actually end up lifting the trophy unless they find a way to actually do something in attack. Next opponent is Switzerland for the English. Very impressive performance against Italy. That was not a contest. The better team clearly won. The most impressive part of this for me from a Swiss perspective is that, unlike England and so many other teams, when they got the first goal, they kept going until they got the second. You didn't see much of a change in terms of the way the game was played. They were in control until they eased off the gas because they had a 2-goal lead, and quite frankly, they just weren't that scared of what Italy was going to do to them, and for good reason. This team always seems to do this. They always get to the round of 16. They always cause people issues in the knockout stage. Just ask France. And the other point I want to make here is that, of course, the headline with this side of the bracket is, look, England's got this thing made to get to the final. But what happens if England loses? It is not just a foregone conclusion. They are going to get to this final. That's not how this works, and they're certainly not playing in a way where they deserve to be talked about like that. I don't care how many ridiculously good players they have. The other teams who are, I know Switzerland have not been particularly impressive from start to finish here, but they were really good in this game. And those guys have been together forever. They've been having success in knockout tournaments forever. They know what they're doing here. It's not just Switzerland, but part of the interesting thing moving forward here is who can give themselves an opportunity on this side of the bracket, where you don't look at the other side and go, I think they can get through the Germanys and the Spains and the Frances of the world. But they can pull an upset against England, and then all of a sudden they might be the favorite to go through. Switzerland is one of those teams I'm looking at that if they can get through the next part, this could really open up for them. We got to be talking about more than England within this context of this quote-unquote weaker side of the bracket. And then finally, that last game, Germany, going back to Saturday, Germany takes care of Denmark. Pretty comprehensive in the end. Looked like they had an early goal, got ruled out. Eventually they got the goals. Job done, looked good. Didn't need to start Florian Wirtz. I would have started Florian Wirtz, but they're moving forward. It's all that matters. They looked good doing it. It wasn't like there was anything particularly concerning going on. So those are your 4 Euro round of 16 games so far. Then jumping over to Copa America real quickly. I want to focus on the CONCACAF side of this. There will be a full U.S. men's national team conversation after that group stage finale against Uruguay. There will be plenty of thoughts about what happened against Panama, what happens in that game. So be on the lookout for that. There will be a video coming. But just generally, I want to talk about CONCACAF for a second. Because this is the World Cup tune-up. We talk about that a lot in the context of the U.S., but that's also true for Mexico. That's also true for Canada. That's also true for everybody in this region. This is not going well for pretty much anyone. You just take it collectively, barring something incomprehensible, CONCACAF is getting 2 teams through. Canada is through, and then it's either going to be the U.S. or it's going to be Panama, depending on how that group plays out. So really the only one, I mean, if Panama go through, then obviously that's a huge success for them. But if we're specifically talking about Canada, Mexico, and the U.S., U.S. have already had a disastrous game, put themselves in a really bad spot. You're not going to feel all that great, even if they find a way to beat Uruguay and go through. But let's just assume for a second that they don't. Mexico's already out. U.S. is staring elimination in the face. Canada is the only team that's been quote-unquote convincing here. And quote-unquote convincing means scoring 1 goal, playing up a man twice against two of the three worst teams in CONMEBOL, according to the World Cup qualifying standings, and just generally what these teams look like. It's not like Canada have been good either. They got through, they got the job done, and part of this is they knew what they needed to do, and that shaped the way that they finished out the group. So congrats to Jesse Marsh and Canada, and also I'm more or less giving them a pass because, well, Jesse Marsh just showed up. But my point is, this is not a criticism of Canada. My point is, if that is the most impressive thing that CONCACAF has to show for this, and I looked at this thing from the beginning talking to people and said, Canada's got a path to the semis here. So I had him getting out of this group. I had him doing it in a more convincing fashion. But the point here being, if that is what you're pointing to as a CONCACAF success, this has been a disastrous tournament. Now, again, it could change. If the U.S. finds a way to go through and the U.S. gets to the semis and Canada gets to the semis, we're having a completely different conversation. But you had so many opportunities. You had 2 groups with 2 CONCACAF teams in them. Those 2 groups are going to produce, again, barring something absolutely bizarre, 1 singular team, and it might be Panama. It simply has not been good enough. And the final part of this, like I said a minute ago, this is important for Canada to bounce back from a disappointing World Cup, but ultimately that team is still growing, that team is still building, and you just got a brand new manager. The stakes weren't as high for Canada because this is your guy and this is your plan for 2026. U.S. and Mexico are still trying to figure out what the plan is for 2026. Because of that, I would argue this tournament was more important for those 2 teams than anybody else in CONCACAF. Mexico's group staging out, U.S. might be group staging out. It's just been, and then, Jamaica has an opportunity to get out of a group, lays an absolute dud. I know part of that is didn't have your goalie, didn't have Leon Bailey, but that team still should have been better than they were. It's just really disappointing the way this is going for CONCACAF. That's what stood out to me in Copa America so far. Again, U.S. has an opportunity to change that conversation. Maybe Canada goes on a deep run, and at least Canada's there. But outside of Venezuela looking really, really good, which shouldn't be all that shocked by considering where they are in the World Cup qualifying standings and what they've been doing recently, the most informed teams in CONMEBOL have looked like the best teams at the tournament. When you're talking about a Brazil, Uruguay, and Argentina, Colombia, that's not shocking. The whole point here, though, was can somebody from CONCACAF step up and look like they belong at this level? And so far, I would argue nobody really has. If so, it's somebody, it's Canada. But even that comes with a lot of caveats. U.S. has one opportunity to change that, and then Canada's going to get those opportunities moving forward because you're playing really good opposition as long as you stay in this tournament now that you're into the knockout stage. Like I said, there will be much more. I've got plenty of U.S. thoughts already. I just want to wait, see what happens against Uruguay before start having those conversations. I was traveling, so did not get an opportunity to do a immediate reaction to Panama. I'll rope some of that in with reaction to Uruguay as well. So be on the lookout for that video. That is all I have for Weekend Roundup. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.